There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Velero community meeting / open discussion. Today is June 8th, 2021. If you haven't already, please add your name to the attendee list in HackMD that we use for meeting notes. It's very useful for us to see who's attending, and yeah, we just want to make sure that we capture everyone and their thoughts and comments. We do have some status updates here, and we'll dive into some discussion topics per usual, most likely. I have one big status update that I'm going to cover first, and then we'll dive into the other ones. So first off, we have a few things that we want to share with the broader community. We have some Velero maintainer changes coming, which will most likely impact the project speed a bit initially, but also give us the possibility of enhancing the feature set of Velero. So first of all, I want to do a big thank you to Nolan, Carlesia, and Ashish. All three of them are on the call here for their fantastic contributions to Velero over the many years. As we move forward, people also move forward, and both Carlesia, Nolan, and Ashish have been looking for other interesting opportunities within VMware for a while, and as such, they will be moving off the Velero project over the next few weeks during a transition process. Second, we're also super excited to welcome 2 new team members who will be ramping up to contribute to Velero. So we have Daniel Young and Venkai Yin on the call here. And both Daniel and Venkai, they've been working on Harbor for a number of years. Daniel is actually the first committer to the Harbor repository, which is pretty neat to see. Daniel and Venkai, since you're on the call, would you like to introduce yourselves? Let's start with Daniel.
Sure. Hey guys, this is Daniel. I'm a maintainer of Harbor. And in addition to Harbor, I also did some commit to open source projects like Claire, Notary, and Docker distribution, mainly the projects we need to be integrated with. And I'm super excited to be joining this community and looking forward to the collaboration. I'll also try to learn some valuable experience and bring it back to Harbor community and make us benefit from this. Thank you, guys.
Sounds awesome. Welcome, Daniel. Venkai, you want to introduce yourself too?
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Venkai. I'm based in China and have been working on another open source project, Harbor, for a couple of years. And I fixed some bugs also for Docker and Docker distribution. And I'm very glad to have a chance to join the Velero team and contribute to this cool project. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, Venkai. Yeah, so as part of this this move, this transition here, the past couple of months, the joint maintainer team for Velero and PM here, Eleanor, have been looking into advancing the feature set of Velero and its capabilities, how we integrate with other backup solutions and disaster recovery solutions, making sure that we open it up for the community even more. So to handle those new advancements and responsibilities, VMware is investing in the core contributor team, and we're actually hiring more engineers here as well. We're looking to hire 5 more people to contribute to Velero and within our team in Beijing. So if you're interested in joining, please let us know. We would love to have you there. And we'll be working on both the Velero project and Project Astrolabe, which I'll know we'll cover in a future community meeting as well. We'll talk more about Astrolabe and kind of the idea of what we want to do moving forward with the Velero project. So again, I want to give a super big shout out to Alicia, Nolan, and Ashish. Thank you so much for being awesome maintainers for years for Velero. I also want to give a big shout out to Dave and Bridget and Scott and Jen Ting, who keep the lights on for Velero as maintainers going forward. And also, again, welcome Daniel and Venkat. Any questions or comments?
Well, I also want to just say thank you to Nolan, Carlisi, and Ashish. I think Velero has been, kind of leading up what data protection on Kubernetes is. I've certainly learned a lot from the team as I've gone through my own journey. So thank you, and we'll be seeing you, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely to echo Dave's sentiments. I'm quite sad actually. I've definitely enjoyed working with Carlicia and Ashish and Nolan, and they've been the best at just being so supportive and helping me learn not just the surface of things, but really deep into the design and the technicalities of it. So I'll be sad. Also excited for the new people. Welcome. It's going to be fun.
As a community member, I also want to thank you, C3, for, I actually learned a lot from you guys when I experienced with Velero and then interact with you guys during the code review, design review, and I'm kind of amazed about of how much you guys know about not only this product, Velero, but also other aspects as well. So I learned a lot from you guys. Thank you very much.
You've been awesome on the team, and you'll be missed, but I'm excited for you and what you'll be working on next. And I'm also excited to welcome new team members as well. So yeah.
+1 to everything that's been said, and a teaser. Carlicia and Scott submitted something at KubeCon for Velero. Carlicia said she's still happy to give that talk if it gets accepted. So hopefully it'll be the first of many times we'll see her and the other and Nolan and Ashish in the future, still with regards to Velero.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your time here. Appreciate everybody's contributions and putting trust in us with your data. It's not going away. It's not ending. And I'm sure I'll see people at KubeCon, whether it's this year or next year. But yeah, I'm not totally disappearing. I don't think Carlicia and Ashish are either. I won't speak for them.
I was just going to say thanks to all you guys for helping me along as I'm coming up as a new maintainer, and even before that, as I was a contributor and member of the community. So thanks again.
It's been great working on the on Velero at VMware, outside of VMware. I've had the chance to work on Velero from both sides. So thanks for allowing me to be a part of the community.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to the original, like the maintainers, the original maintainers, the maintainers from the beginning, who were always so engaged and set that culture of high engagement and high learning, and allowed me to learn a lot. And I also appreciate the community that we were able to build, who's also very engaged and vested in the product. And it's going to be good to see Velero growing up. I think it's a new phase for Velero to become a grown-up backup product, an enterprise level product. And I'm not going to be really far away from it at all. So this sounds like such a hard goodbye, but we're going to be around. I just really have a lot of appreciation for these almost 3 years that I worked on this project.
And just to follow up on what Jonas said, yeah, I feel like Carlicia, you and the others have brought this to Velero, such a good place. Like you've really developed Velero. It has such a strong community, and we're very excited for this next phase with Astrolabe. There's that teaser. We'll figure out maybe even in the next community meeting, we can talk more about that. it's nothing too different. It's part of Velero still, but just a new direction from a product perspective. And I'm very excited to work with the new team members. So coming from an excellent era of Velero and going to a new era of Velero.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, again, thank you everyone for all your contributions so far, and looking forward to more future contributions to the project here, and growth as well of the both the community and the project and features and everything. So it's going to be super interesting to see in the next coming months here what we can do. All right. So with that big thing out of the way, as we are ramping up our efforts over in Beijing as well, we'll most likely switch around the community meetings a bit. And I've been talking to the maintainers about this as well. We'll most likely do like a bi-weekly rotating schedule, but I'll set up a poll for everyone to join in and share some thoughts on when that would be a good time for everyone. I want to make sure that we capture everyone's time slots there as well. All right, so with that, we're going to dive into regular status updates, and then we have some discussion topics. First up, we have Dave.
There's the mute button. Nothing too special. Just went through. We did. Bridget, Carlisi, and I sat down and did a little review-a-thon last week. We did make some good progress on getting some PRs merged, and we'll continue to burn down the PR list. And yeah, I'm still working on the upload progress monitoring, among other things.
Sounds good. Any questions, comments for Dave? All right, Bridget.
So like Dave mentioned, we spent time last week catching up and getting through some of the review backlog. Last week I promised a design doc for plugin versioning, but a few other things came up in the meantime. That is like, I have it ready. It's about to be committed and pushed. So it will be there so shortly, and apologies to those who are waiting for it. But thank you for your patience.
Sounds good. Any questions, comments for Bridget? All right, then let's dive into some discussion topics. Fine.
Yeah, so I've been doing some scale tests on the Velero backup and restore, and I bump into a few issues. Last week I talked about one issue that Scott, I created a bug on OpenShift plugin, and we working with Scott on Red Hat about that bug. This week I present a few more. So it's all of them related to the fact that in the names, when a namespace have a lot of resources, right? The usage for it is that our customer, they create their own CID, and they keep track of things. They put a lot of CR onto the namespace. As a consequence, when we back up on restore the namespace, we hit these problems. I already find a bug on Velero. Can I share the screen?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah. So I want to share my screen, so I talk about a few of them. So so the one problem is that when we back up a namespace with a lot of space, the Velero pod itself got killed. It ran out of my Velero pod. I configure it with 128 megabyte of memory. But even when I increase it to 512 megabyte, it still fail. I haven't tested on higher configuration yet, but it looked like we have the scale issues here, because here is I look at the code a little bit. I want to the situation is this: with if I create a namespace with like say 10,000 of CR, any kind of CR, right? In this sample test case that I test, I'm using secret and service account, but you can imagine that it can be any CR, and then just run simple backup, and within a minute, the Velero pod, got killed with the. As you can see here, this is the sample that I run, and it got the after the pod restart. You look at the status, you're going to see that it got killed because of out of memory, right? And I dig into Velero code, and I found that in the backup at the beginning of it, we call this get all item, and then we would go through a loop and backing up one by one, right? So this is the loop that we're going to back up. So I haven't put in debug to figure out exactly what happened yet, but from the code flow, it looked like if we collect all the items to back up here, the more item we have, the bigger this list will be occupied in the memory, and it eventually run out. 128 megabytes is not a lot when it comes to thousands of items in a namespace, right? And that is where the bug coming in, is that it crashed the Velero pod, and that caused another bug, which is when the pod restarted, right? The Velero backup resource is still there, and the phase is still in progress. When Velero pod is popping up, it back up, it restarted. It doesn't continue do anything with the backup CR that already there. It just leave it there. As a consequence, when the client side, I'm tracking the backup, and all I see was just, I don't see any progress on it, right? After 5-10 minutes, 20 minutes, I have to time out and kill the thing, and that is something that I think this feature is lacking, is that maybe after the Velero pod restart, and it see that there is a backup in progress laying around, maybe it should pick it up, set it at fail, or continue with the backup, or whatever we do with it, right? I don't know exactly. We might need to discuss here. I'm just describing the situation that I see. So that is number 2 problem, right? And number 3 problem is not in the backup, but rather in the restore. So that's number 3 here. So number 3 is that during backup, I can see that the status of the backup being updated, right? So every once in a while, we say, hey, backup 10 out of 20 out of 2,000 items, 100 out of 300. But I don't see the same thing in the restore. So in the restore, I only see it change from in progress, and until it finishes all the way to the end, it say completed, right? However, in the case that it, the Velero pod not restart in the middle, all I see is just in progress forever, right? It just stuck there forever. And then that point, my restore side have no clue whether the backup and the restore is going on or the pod already dead, right? So those 3 are the 3 issues that I found out when I test a namespace with a lot of resource in it. And again, I don't think it's related to what type of resource, but it might be happen to any type of resource, as long as there's a large number of it. So I want to share with you guys here to see what we should will have about it. After that, and then I have another topic if you want to discuss. But let's talk about these 3 bugs in terms of the scale first.
Yeah, so in terms of scale, so there's a PR out right now for a multiple namespace scale test, which takes us to like 2,500 namespaces and tries that. And what we should do is take what you're doing and add that, make a scale test, an EE test, where we can dial it up and down. And then we can, I think we can give some recommendations. For example, like if your cluster is this big, allocate this much memory. So I think there's a difference between like the system goes exponential, for example, when we have a large number of items or we just need more memory. I think allocating even like a gig of RAM or a couple gigs of RAM for Velero doesn't seem unreasonable in today's world. We could look at other ways of like streaming stuff through that's going to be bigger changes to the code. And I think one of the thing we could also look at, I think to some extent it dumps things to a file in between. I think one of the issues is how do we get a relatively consistent view of the API server? Because like if we stream stuff but we don't process it quickly enough, then it's kind of spread out in time. So I think we should start with just adding some scale tests that replicate what you're seeing and dial it up and down and see, like what the memory versus scale would be. Does that seem reasonable?
I think that's a good start in terms of what we should do to start observing, analyze the problem. But as I point out that in our backup core function, right, the backup function, we do things in serials. We accumulate all of the item first, and then we back up it later, and that might cause fundamental, the workflow itself have a problem right there, right? So
it's going to be a balancing act here, I think, because we don't really have a snapshot mechanism for the API server. So, if we spread it out more in time, because right now I think the thought here is we grab all the resources as quickly as possible so we get a somewhat static view of them. If we kind of let it spread out in time, things can be changing in the API server more while we're fetching items. So I think there's definitely room there to improve, but I think we have to be a little bit careful about how we do it. We're going to have to.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, because I remember when I have to serialize, I have to change the order of backing up item in the my app consistent back in the project last year. So I have to get a bunch of all of the items first and reorganize them into a specific sequence that I want. If I don't collect all of them, I will not able to do that, right? So yeah, maybe.
I'll also toss out there that the problem with not being able to snapshot or get a consistent view of the Kubernetes API server is something other data protection projects have run into. This came up at the data protection working group. I don't think there's been any progress on it, but somebody threw out the idea of having something equivalent to an FS freeze or a lock on the whole API server, or at least for reads, but I don't know how far that's gone. I think it was mentioned once in a meeting and that's it. But that may be another angle to try to solve the problem. I think Velero needs to fix it in terms of its own memory management, but in terms of like getting a snapshot of the Kubernetes API server, if we can expose like Astrolabe endpoints and then grab that data, that would be great. I have to drop here in just a second, but I'll also mention Dave, Eleanor, and I had done some triage of old issues a while ago, and there was some pagination bugs that could potentially help here, but I think that's related to what Dave is saying about expanding over time. Like as you paginate, that slows you down a little bit in terms of getting items out of the server, but you wouldn't blow out the memory limit as quickly. So that's a possibility, but I also agree that like upping the memory limit will help. But the thing that will help dial this in is having scale tests to run whatever solutions get implemented against.
Yeah, and we can set some numbers, for example, like recommended numbers, like you have this many resources, you need this much RAM. And that at least is a guide for people to work with. So let's work on taking what you're testing right now and making some EDE tests. I don't think it's going to be too hard. It should be pretty quick with the framework we have currently. So why don't you ping me offline on that? And then The second point was handling server restarts, and that's definitely an issue. That's something I was planning to address in the upload progress stuff because we have to deal with restarts there anyway. So I think that's something we will address in the 1.7 timeframe. And it's definitely, yeah, what we're doing right now is not good. We should be able to restart the server and have the right thing happen. And that will probably be, we fail the backup, but that's better than, you know, just stopping, which is kind of what we do right now. And then the third item, I'm sorry, I've now blanked on it.
The third item is the restore do not receive an update on the number of item has been restoring so
Okay.
far. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was something, wasn't there a patch that went in for that in the last release, and then it broke the stuff, it broke Scott, it broke like CR stuff now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One of the things that may be going on here is, again, once you've restarted the Velero server, even though the status says in progress for that backup or that restore, it's not actually being processed. So there would be no updates there. So if that's the only not updating, I think the issue is that it's because we're not actually processing it anymore, even though it says in progress. Because once you restart Velero, Velero ignores anything that's not new. If there's actual failure to update, there were, I guess, two things I noticed when I was dealing with the restore progress. One was it was breaking CR restore because we were processing it ahead of time. And I've got a PR out there that once I had some end-to-end tests for and respond to some other feedback, we should be able to fix. Another aspect here, and this doesn't affect the CR updating itself in terms of the restore, but the backup progress was also logging, you know, when we restored an item, it would say, you know, item 5 out of 30 or whatever. Restore progress wasn't doing that. I ended up going ahead and adding an equivalent logging through the restore progress as part of that PR. But in terms of the updating the restore CR itself, I don't know that I saw anything there that would fail to update if Velero was actually restoring items. So I think we'd want to see whether the fact that it stopped updating was because the restore itself stalled and then we restarted Velero, or whether we were actually succeeding in restoring items that weren't getting updated in the progress. That would be a kind of more fundamental issue with the progress reporting that I haven't seen, but I haven't necessarily looked for.
I actually done a test, and in which we restore about 1,800 items, and
okay.
And during that, it was successfully restored the entire namespace with that many items. However, during the restore, I do not see any update. I only see in progress and at the end, just complete. That's it. So at least that's what I see in my test.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to see more because it takes many minutes. You know, it's from from one point to another, it takes many minutes. So hopefully that you get something in the middle to let the client side know that, hey, it's still doing the restore.
Yeah, and that is the point of that's what it should be doing. I'm not sure whether those updates get batched or whether like kind of how often we update the restore and again, one question is, are you seeing the same on backup or is it different for backup and restore? Because if at all possible, we should be doing the same thing in both. And if one of them is not updating as often as the other, that may be an issue to look into.
Oh, the backup, I see the update more frequently. I'm do an informer to watch for the backup CR, and I saw that the number of items being updated.
Okay, got it. So that may be something to look into. It would be, again, worth seeing whether we're seeing this in all cases or just in certain cases. But if that's true across the board, that's definitely something that we would need to fix with, because again, if backup's doing it, restore needs to be doing it too. Those two should be roughly equivalent. And so if they're not, there could be something going on there.
Yeah, I have filed issues on Velero. So about what I observed.
Yeah, and one weird thing. So, well, I don't know, weird, but the restore patch, the restore progress patch, that had broken Frankie's tests initially, which were, you know, because she had didn't, and we did a lot of work with that, and we got Frankie's tests working again. And Frankie's tests use custom resource definitions and CRs. So I'm curious how we wound up in a state where, we're not restoring the CRDs properly, even though I'm pretty sure all of Frankie's tests are passing.
Yeah, well, and what was happening is, and I'm not sure, maybe that her tests do it a little something differently, is that basically, right now, kind of before this change, on the backup side, anytime when we back up a resource, we go through the list of resources we backed up, and we confirm are any of these CRDs, and if they are, we include the CRD definition in the backup. And then on the restore side, we put CRDs in the first block in the priority order. So we restore CRDs first and refresh the schema. So again, in the old logic where we would iterate over the list of resources in priority order, restore that resource completely, then go to the next one, validate, and then restore it. By the time we got to a custom resource, that CRD had already been restored and things had been refreshed. With the restore progress, we pre-processed all of that. So you would go through the list of the resource list, validate, count the number of items, add it to your total. And so the problem there was when we got to those custom resources, the CRD had been looked at, but not restored. So it was failing. Now, if the CRD already existed in the cluster, this wouldn't break anything. The issue would be, so for example, if you do a backup with custom resources and CRDs, you delete the CRD and the resources, you wait long enough. That was one thing that, that came out too. If you do this and then you immediately restore, things haven't flushed necessarily, and so you still might have that resource available. So if you wait long enough, and then you try to restore with the existing 1.6 code base, you're failing on the validation side. So we actually see that error saying, hey, this custom resource, this type is not known to the server, before we go and actually try to restore anything. So what my PR does is it basically runs the CRD restore first, just that one resource type. And then do everything else. That way, by the time we get to validate, because who knows how many of those resources in your list are custom resources. If the CRDs are all restored first, then when you get to those, they all exist, the validation succeeds, we can count the number of items and go on. I'm not sure how those tests that were failing and now working, interact with any of this, to see whether it was a question of the CRDs already exist there in the test, prior, because that was one thing where, if you create them in the cluster and then you back them up and then you delete the items but not the CRD definition and then restore, nothing's going to fail because the API server still knows about that resource. So that may be why those tests are passing.
Yeah,
and I think further to the point that Scott made, we're talking about like the cache information as well. So that was, I tried to reproduce this issue locally. And even though I had deleted the CRD and then performed the restore, there was still some cached information about that CRD in the cluster. So it was still able to perform the validation, even though if I made a query to the API server, it said that, the CRD didn't exist, but well, not that it didn't exist, but there was some other error that it couldn't like resolve the shorthand name that I'd given it to the full name. So it still had a reference in there, even though it wasn't accessible and you couldn't create resources of that type. So my guess is that because there hadn't been like a refresh done of the client that we're using to communicate with the API server in between the deletion and then the restore.
Yep. And again, I know that I did reproduce this when there had been, when I first ran into this, I was actually backing up on one cluster and restoring to another. So of course it wasn't there at all. But then I ran through the test again after deleting it, but there would have been several minutes in between. So again, whatever caching was in place would have been flushed. So that's, I think you said as well that by restarting Velero, you were also able to reproduce it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that like whenever Frankie originally wrote these tests, that she ran into some issues where she had to do things in a specific order due to the fact that the API discovery client hadn't run by a particular point or
yeah,
cached
definitely
something. Yeah, I know there
I
was...
had to I actually incorporated restarting Velero pods to account for that, to be able to account for the refresh during, not during restore, but I think during backup. It's been so long since I worked closely with those tests. But yeah, I definitely had to do some acrobatics to get those to work.
Yeah, I think one thing that would be nice to add to our automated testing. So right now we basically do backups and restores into the same cluster because we don't really have infra to spin up a new cluster. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, we have internal stuff here at VMware that's doing this. But I'd like, and we could maybe do something with Find. But if there's anything else that anybody can think of that would be a good way to spin up new clusters as automatically as part of the testing, I'd be very open to it.
All right, so do we have a clear path forward, more performance testing, setting up end-to-end testing as well, Dave, as you mentioned? And then formalizing best practices when you have X number of CRDs and resources.
Yeah, so we'll do some more scale testing, and the other issues that Fong mentioned, we've got on the radar, and we will at least we try to get them both fixed up in the 1.7 timeframe. I think they should be one's a big lift that is already planned, and the other one should be a small patch. Restore progress.
Okay, if we're done with that, I have another topic that I want to talk about. Sorry, I take all the time, but
we don't have any other discussion topics right now, so go for it.
Okay, so the idea is about the replication of namespace from one cluster to another, right? Right now, because I don't have other solution, what I do is I back up the namespace in this cluster, right, into my backup device, and then I have to restore it to another one, and that take time, right? So it's like one stop. It takes additional hop. I was wondering if in the scenario, if I want to I want to replicate my namespace from one cluster to another. Is there any way I can do that, between two Velero pods, one side backing up and send data directly to another side and restore it directly, right? Without any hop, any have to store data to another place. Right now, I don't think Velero have that feature between communication between two Velero servers. So to do that operation, if I don't, if anyone know the solution, know that Velero have that, please let me know. But I don't think we have. So my question whether if we don't have it, then do you see in any future? Do we have a Velero? Do we have any kind of plan for that at all? Or
We do actually. So part of it is in the Astrolabe framework, and one of the goals there is to abstract out things like snapshotting and restoring namespaces, volumes, etc., so that we can disconnect them from going to S3, for example, and take a source and a destination and just hook them together directly. So that's on the roadmap, and we can talk about that. And Raphael and Frankie are working on some stuff. I don't know if they want to chime in.
Hi, this is Raphael. We've been working on this use case long. At this point, what we have is what we call remote Velero. You have a Velero running on a different cluster than the actual you're gonna take the backup and the restore. So basically, this Velero running in a management cluster or whatever you call it, it makes this connection over the API, writes in a dummy minial instance. So in that case, you don't persist that data, and then immediately the other Velero running on a different namespace starts to restore. right? You need to do some coordination, of course, but that removes at least the writing on a disk and removes the need of all the clusters have Velero installed and connected to object storage, because by the end of the day, you have a dummy object storage running on the same management cluster. If you're interested in this, we can talk a little bit more. We can work with Dave and see how we can make it a feature. Makes sense. But it should depend on the object storage.
Do you have any kind of more detail on when it will be available, or and so on and so forth?
That's something that we have to discuss as a group, Leonor and Dave, and see if there is more use cases for that.
Yeah, at least we are interested in that.
Okay.
At least in my user case, right now I have to do the backup to storage before I can restore. And if you guys do that directly, it will help, at least in my usage a lot, that I don't have to, I just replicate between the two clusters.
Okay. Yeah, and this use case is common. It's similar to what probably Red Hat folks experience, that eliminating the need of installing Velero on legacy clusters is a big deal, right? All of a sudden you can run a single Velero version on a management cluster that connects to everything you want to need to migrate or backup or restore.
Yeah, there's actually two things that helps with. One is the fact that right now we're having to install Velero in a legacy cluster and having to modify the CRDs to allow us to install, even though it's not supported, and we're hoping it works, but we know that it's not guaranteed to work, on a like Kubernetes 111 cluster, for example, which is an OpenShift 3.11. And the other aspect which is what Feng's talking about, is kind of there's the performance aspect. I mean, we've already found, for example, one thing we're doing with the latest version of the conveyor migration tool is instead of using Restic for copying file systems to the S3 store and then out again on the restore, is we're actually bypassing Velero for PVC copy and just doing an rsync, basically, having a separate controller that creates PVCs and then rsyncs between them, and we're improving performance there by just doing a direct copy of PV data from one cluster to the other. And what Feng's talking about would allow some similar performance enhancements, doing the same with the Velero data.
Yeah, I think there's two parts there. Is the number one is the metadata of the namespace, and the other one, the second one is the storage data, right? The PVC, for example, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
and then the PVC is the one I'm saying that with the conveyor crane product, for example, where we do the migrations from one cluster to another, we've actually done that with PVCs, where we're not using Velero to back up PVCs if the user decides to do the direct copy, and instead we're actually having a separate controller that creates PVCs based on the metadata and then does rsync to copy the data straight from one to the other. That's orchestrating another layer kind of in addition to, but then we use Velero for everything else, for all the cluster Kubernetes data. But for the Kubernetes side and everything through Velero, we're still doing the full backup to the the backup storage location, and then that storage location is also in the restore cluster, which we then use to Velero restore there.
Yeah, so please keep me up to date with that project, because I'm interested in it. I even able to help if that is what needed.
Yeah, I just have one question regarding this. When we say replication, I mean, just like you mentioned. So does that mean that this replication will happen in the same site, I mean data center, or it will be a cross site?
It's cross-site. It's cross-site.
Okay. For example,
the two clustered, one of them in San Jose, the other one in New York, for example.
Okay, for example, if we use the cloud provider, for example, the AWS, we have backup. I mean, we have the cluster in one region. So the requirement from yours is to replicate this to another region directly.
Yeah, something like that,
Okay.
right? The idea was that we able to do that. We able to do that without involving, you know, one more hop of backing up to another storage. Baby, the storage can be on cloud or local. However, it add the additional hop into our flow of data flow, right?
Yeah, maybe I do not know currently the details about how we backup through the cloud provider. Maybe, for example, if you will use AWS, we still use the EBS snapshot to do the backup. If with that, if you try to replicate it to another region, so how that snapshot can be used in another region.
Yeah, so there's EBS has EBS Direct, which lets you, for example, take a snapshot and then pull the data out of it using their API. So we're working on that. I actually got the POC. I can extract data, and next step is to push it back into a snapshot.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting.
All right. So follow up on that as well. New project coming along. Anything else anyone want to add to that discussion topic today? Does anyone have any other discussion topics for today? All right. Thank you all for joining. Have a fantastic rest of the week, and see you all next week. Bye, folks.